I have always loved October in Marysville. This month is special to me. The leaves turn crimson, the air fills with the bitter scent of autumn, and my garden looks like a painting that Howard and I once bought on our first wedding anniversary. Our garden, now it's mine alone. It's been 5 years since Howard passed away, but this house still holds his presence. This morning, I slowly made tea in the kitchen, where every corner holds memories of 52 years of life together. My hands wouldn't obey me. Arthritis is becoming more and more persistent with each passing year. 76 is no joke, as my mother used to say. She only lived to be 70, and now I understand that every day after that milestone is a gift, even if it sometimes comes with a catch. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Through the lace curtains, I saw my son's familiar silver sedan. Randall comes every Sunday with his family, a tradition we've kept up since he got his own house. After my stroke a month ago, the visits became more frequent. They also come on Wednesdays. Hi, Mom! Randall crossed the threshold, bent down, and kissed me on the cheek. He smelled of the cologne I had given him for Christmas. How are you today? Still alive, as you can see, I smiled, leaning on my cane. After my stroke, my right leg became uncooperative. The doctor said it would get better with time, but for now, I moved slower than a turtle. Behind Randall, Abby, my daughter-in-law, entered the house. Tall, slender, with perfectly styled chestnut hair, she always looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a real estate magazine. Perhaps because she worked as a real estate agent and her appearance was part of her profession. In the 20 years she had been married to Randall, we had never become truly close. Abby always kept her distance, polite but insurmountable. Hello, Telma. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You look so cheerful today. It sounded as if my cheerfulness was somehow inappropriate. I noticed her gaze glide across the living room, lingering on the Victorian clock I had inherited from my grandmother. Abby always did that. She would walk into my house and take inventory. Grandma! Piper, my 14-year-old granddaughter, jumped out from behind her parents. Unlike her mother, she rushed to hug me without any preamble. I missed you! I have something for you! Piper pulled a book out of her backpack, a well-worn volume of Jane Austen that I had been looking for my collection. I found it at a flea market last weekend and immediately thought of you. You're a treasure, I said, hugging her tightly. Piper is the spitting image of me when I was young, not only in appearance but also in character. She is just as straightforward and uncompromising. Behind her came Cody, my 17-year-old grandson, tall and thin, with his eyes always downcast and headphones around his neck. He smiled awkwardly and nodded at me, not daring to come closer. Hi, Grandma. Hello, my computer genius. I held out my hand, and he gently squeezed my fingers. Cody had always been shy, but lately I had noticed a new awkwardness in him, especially in his mother's presence. Kids, help Grandma set the table, Abby ordered without taking off her coat. Dad and I will see what needs to be fixed around the house. This was something new. Randall usually did help me with minor repairs, but Abby had never shown any interest in the condition of the house. Everything's fine, I objected. Our neighbor Irvin checked the roof and gutters last week, and the plumber was here a month ago. Mom, the house is getting old. Randall looked unusually tense. You know that after your, incident, Abby and I are worried about how you're coping on your own. Incident. That's what he called my stroke now, as if it weren't a medical diagnosis, but an awkward mistake on my part. I'm doing just fine, I snapped. Dr. Hayes said my recovery is going well. Still, Mom, Randall exchanged a quick glance with his wife. Such a big house requires a lot of energy. Exactly, Abby chimed in with an enthusiasm that sent a chill down my spine. 4 bedrooms, 2 floors, a huge garden. It's too much for a woman your age, especially with your health issues. My age? I raised an eyebrow. Abby, dear, you talk as if I have 1 foot in the grave. Come now, Thelma, that's not what I meant at all. She laughed too loudly. It's just that in your situation, it would be wiser to live in a smaller place, without stairs and with fewer worries. While the children were clattering with dishes in the kitchen, I stared intently at my sister-in-law. In my situation, Abby? And what is that situation? She was a little taken aback but quickly recovered. Well, you've had a stroke. The The doctors say it could happen again at any time. What if you fall down the stairs or slip in the bathroom? There won't be anyone around to help you. I have a panic button, I said, pointing to the bracelet on my wrist, and neighbors who check in on me every day. Mom, Randall sat down on the armrest of my chair. Abby and I are just suggesting that you consider selling the house. You could buy an apartment in a single-story complex for retirees or, he paused, or move in with you. I finished for him. Randall, you have a 3-bedroom house. Where would I stay? In the basement? We could convert the study, he suggested uncertainly. Temporarily, Abby quickly added, until we find the perfect solution. Something in her tone made me wary. I had taught English literature for 40 years and had learned to recognize insincerity in words as well as a lie detector. I'm not moving anywhere, I said firmly. This house is mine. I've spent my whole life here with your father, Randall. You were born here. This is where I want to die when the time comes. But Mom, dinner's ready, Piper announced, appearing in the living room doorway. Grandma, we reheated your signature chicken pot pie. It smells delicious. The conversation stopped, but I felt that the subject was not closed. Over lunch, Abby chatted casually about the children's school, her clients, and new trends in the Marysville real estate market. I noticed how her gaze kept lingering on the antique silverware that served the table, the paintings on the walls, and the crystal chandelier. How are your savings, Telma? She asked suddenly when the conversation died down. I've heard that medical expenses after a stroke can be significant. Randall choked on his water. Abby, that's not really appropriate. Why not? She shrugged. We're family. We need to discuss financial matters openly, especially now that Telma is in a vulnerable position. My finances are fine, thank you for your concern, I replied dryly. I have good insurance and sufficient savings. Really? Abby's eyes sparkled with interest. Did Howard leave any investments? Abby. Randall looked genuinely shocked this time. What did I ask? She looked offended. I just want to know how stable your mother's financial situation is. What's wrong with that? After lunch, the children helped me with the dishes, and then Cody retreated to a corner of the living room with his laptop, while Piper volunteered to help me repot the houseplants. Randall and Abby disappeared, and I could hear their muffled voices coming from the study on the first floor. Grandma, don't sell the house, Piper said quietly when we were alone on the porch. Mom hasn't talked about anything else lately. I looked at my granddaughter. Her eyes, so similar to Howard's, were full of concern. Don't worry, sweetheart. No one will make me sell the house that Grandpa and I bought by saving every penny. She nodded, but the worry remained in her eyes. When Piper went back inside, I decided to take advantage of the quiet moment and have some tea on the porch. The autumn air was cool, but the sun was still warm through the yellowed maple leaves. I threw a shawl over my shoulders and settled into a wicker chair. Suddenly, I heard the voices of my son and daughter-in-law coming from the slightly open window of the study. We can't wait any longer, Randall. Abby's voice sounded tense. The collectors are calling every day. If we don't pay at least part of the debt this month, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. I know. Randall's voice sounded depressed. But we can't just take money from Mom. Why not? Abby's voice was steely. She's not spending it anyway. Why does a 76-year-old woman need that much money? She has no needs. But it's her money, Abby. And we're her family. If we lose the house, where will the kids go? Have you thought about that? There was a pause. How much do we need? Randall finally asked. At least $50,000 to pay off the most urgent debts. But if your mother sold this house, we could pay everyone off completely and still have enough left over for decent housing for her. She'll never agree. You heard her. Then we'll have to convince her. Abby's voice sounded desperate. Randall, you have to understand we have no choice. Either we get this money or we lose everything. Your mother could live perfectly well in a nursing home. Many elderly people do, and we could manage her finances and help her. I don't know, Abby. Randall, this is the solution to all our problems. Selling her house, helping her manage her money. In the end, she'll leave everything to you anyway. We're just speeding up the process a little. There's nothing wrong with that. I felt the blood drain from my face. So that's it. That's why Abby suddenly became so concerned about my well-being, not because she cared about her elderly mother-in-law, but because of money. My money. Money that Howard and I had saved our whole lives, denying ourselves many things. I quietly got up from my chair, trying not to make a sound. I needed time to think, time to figure out how to proceed. This quiet storm had been brewing in my family for a long time, and now I had to decide how to protect myself from my own children. That night, after my son and his family left, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Abby's words swirled around in my head, causing anxiety and bitterness. How could it be that my own son saw me as a financial asset that could be used to solve his problems? At what point did I go from being a beloved mother to a burden who could be put in a nursing home so he could get his hands on her money? I woke up in the morning with a headache. The right side of my body felt heavier than usual, as if it were filled with lead. I struggled to get out of bed, leaning on my cane. I usually made myself oatmeal for breakfast, but today even simple movements around the house seemed like an impossible task. Somehow making it to the phone, I dialed the number of Betty, my longtime friend and former colleague. Thelma? Her voice sounded concerned. Are you okay? It's almost 10 and you always call at 8. Not really, I admitted. I'm not feeling well today. My head is splitting and my leg won't listen to me. I'll come over, Betty said without hesitation. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone with gratitude. Betty had been my rock since we started teaching together at Marysville High School almost 50 years ago. She was there when Howard died, coming to see me every day for the first month after his death, just so I wouldn't be alone with my grief. Betty arrived quickly, as promised. She helped me take my pills, made breakfast, and insisted on calling the doctor. This could be a second stroke, Thelma, she said seriously. This is no joke. Dr. Hayes arrived 2 hours later, examined me, and shook his head. It looks like a mini stroke, Thelma. Not as serious as last time, but we need to be careful. Do you live alone? Yes, I said, not mentioning my suspicions about my son and daughter-in-law's plans. That's not good. He shook his head. You need supervision for at least the next few weeks. Do you have anyone who could stay with you? Betty immediately volunteered to help, but I knew she had her own health problems. Arthritis and diabetes don't make life any easier. I'll call my son, I said after a long pause. He has keys to the house and can look after me. When the doctor left, Betty looked at me doubtfully. Are you sure? After what you told me about Abby's plans? What choice do I have? I shrugged. I can't ask you to move here. I have no choice. Betty reluctantly agreed, but made me promise to call her every day and report any problems immediately. Randall and Abby arrived an hour after my call. Abby looked worried, but I noticed a strange gleam in her eyes that I didn't like at all. Mom, Randall looked genuinely concerned. The doctor said you need constant supervision. Abby and I think it would be best for you to move in with us, at least for a while. I can hire a caregiver, I objected. That's very expensive, Thelma, Abby immediately interjected. And who knows what kind of person you'll get. You can't trust strangers these days. But there's always someone at our house. I work from home 3 days a week. Randall can adjust his schedule, and the kids can help after school. I was hesitant. The thought of leaving my home caused me almost physical pain. But I knew that I really couldn't do without help right now. Just for the duration of the renovation, I finally agreed. And I'll pay for my keep. Come on, Mom, Randall protested. Your family. How can we talk about payment? Abby was silent, but I saw her discreetly squeeze her husband's hand, as if urging him not to argue with me on this point. That same day, they helped me gather the necessary items, documents, and medications. Abby made sure I took my checkbook and bank cards. You might need to buy something, she explained with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. My son's house was just as I remembered it. Small but well kept, with a neat lawn and a freshly painted fence. I was given a room on the first floor, Randall's former study, hastily converted into a bedroom. You'll be comfortable here, Mom, Randall said, placing my bag by the bed. No stairs, and the bathroom is right across the hall. I looked around. The room was small, most of it taken up by a single bed, clearly bought in a hurry. By the window stood an old desk, littered with papers that no one had bothered to tidy up. Randall's diplomas and certificates hung on the walls. "Thank you," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "That's very kind of you. Get some rest, Thelma." Abby patted me on the shoulder as if I were a child. "Dinner will be at 6. I'll call you." The first few days at my son's house were relatively peaceful. I slept a lot, took my medication, and gradually began to feel better. My legs still didn't work properly, but the headaches became less frequent. Piper often stopped by after school to tell me about her day and sometimes read to me aloud. Cody was more reserved, but he also brought me tea and asked how I was feeling. On the 4th day of my stay at my son's house, something happened that made me wary. Abby invited a social worker to assess my condition and needs, as she put it. "Why?" I asked in surprise. "I feel fine and will be going home soon." "It's standard procedure for elderly patients after a stroke," Abby explained with that false concern in her voice that I had learned to recognize. "You may be eligible for some benefits or assistance from the government." I wanted to argue that I didn't need government assistance, that I had enough of my own resources, but I decided not to argue. Something told me it was better to observe and gather information. The social worker, a young woman named Lauren, arrived after lunch. Abby escorted her to my room and remained present during the conversation, despite my hints that I would prefer to talk alone. "Mrs. Brown, how are you feeling?" Lauren sat down next to my bed, holding a notebook on her lap. "Much better, thank you," I replied. "I think I'll be able to go home in a week." "Mom is too optimistic," Abby immediately interjected. "Dr. Hayes said it would take at least a month to recover, maybe longer." I frowned. Dr. Hayes hadn't said anything like that. "Actually, besides," Abby continued, not letting me finish, "my mother-in-law has episodes of confusion. Sometimes she forgets what day it is or doesn't recognize her grandchildren." "What?" I was so shocked that I was speechless for a moment. "That's not true. My memory is perfectly fine." "See?" Abby shook her head sadly, turning to the social worker. "She gets very agitated when we try to discuss her condition. Denial is part of her problem." Lauren nodded with professional sympathy and made a note in her notebook. "Abby, stop it right now!" I felt the blood rush to my face with anger. "I am of sound mind and memory." "Your mother-in-law has always been very independent," Abby sighed, as if my indignation only confirmed her words. "It's hard for her to accept that she can no longer live alone, but after her second stroke, it became clear that she needed constant supervision." "It wasn't a second stroke, it was a mini-stroke." I tried to speak calmly, even though I was seething with rage and resentment inside. "And Dr. Hayes said I'm recovering well." "Dr. Hayes doesn't see her every day." Abby leaned toward Lauren, lowering her voice, but loud enough for me to hear. "Yesterday, she tried to leave the house at 3 in the morning. She said she needed to check if the windows in her classroom were closed. She was a teacher, you know? She retired 20 years ago, but sometimes she forgets that. It was a blatant lie. I hadn't gotten up in the night, and I certainly hadn't tried to go anywhere." But before I could protest, Lauren asked another question. "Mrs. Brown, do you remember what day it is today?" "Wednesday, October 8th, I replied firmly. "Actually, today is Thursday, the 9th, Lauren gently corrected me. I froze. Had I made a mistake? No, I clearly remembered that yesterday was the 7th. Cody had mentioned that he had an algebra test on Tuesday, the 7th. Or had I? My confusion did not escape the social worker. She made another note, and I felt panic rising inside me. Was I really losing my memory? Or... "I need to take my medication," I said, needing a break. "Abby, can you bring me my pills and some water?" "Of course." She left the room, and I seized the moment. "Listen," I leaned toward Lauren, lowering my voice. "I don't have dementia or confusion. My daughter-in-law, I think she has her reasons for making me seem sicker than I really am." Lauren looked puzzled. "Mrs. Brown, your family is very concerned about you. Your daughter-in-law just wants to make sure you get all the help you need. She wants control of my money," I said bluntly. "They're having financial problems." Lauren clearly didn't know how to respond to my words. At that moment, Abby returned with my medication and a glass of water. "Here you go, Telma," she said, handing me 2 pills I didn't recognize. "What are these?" I frowned. These aren't my usual pills. Dr. Hayes called yesterday and adjusted your dosage, Abby explained. Don't worry, it's all written down in your file. I looked at the pills suspiciously. One was white and oval-shaped. Perhaps it was indeed my usual aspirin, but in a different dosage. The other was small, round, and blue. I had never taken anything like it before. I'd like to speak to Dr. Hayes myself, I said. Of course, Abby smiled, but her eyes remained cold. I'll call him tomorrow and schedule an appointment. In the meantime, you need to take your medication as prescribed. Under Lauren's watchful gaze, I swallowed the pills, feeling I had no choice. After that, the social worker asked me a few more questions about my health, daily habits, and ability to take care of myself. I tried to answer clearly and concisely, but soon felt strangely sleepy and had difficulty concentrating. Telma needs some rest, Abby said, noticing that my head was starting to nod. Maybe we should continue this conversation another time? Lauren nodded as she gathered her things. Before leaving, she left several brochures about resources for seniors and their caregivers. One of them was about Marysville nursing homes. After she left, I fell into a deep, heavy sleep. When I woke up, it was already dark outside. My head felt heavy, and my mouth was dry. Something was wrong with those pills. The next day, something even more disturbing happened. Abby brought in a notary, a heavy-set middle-aged man with a briefcase full of documents. Thelma, she entered my room without knocking. This is Mr. Dawson. He's going to help us with some legal formalities. What formalities? I was wary. Nothing special. Abby waved her hand dismissively. Just some medical powers of attorney so that Randall and I can represent your interests at the hospital or with your doctor if you are unable to. After 2 strokes, it's a sensible precaution, isn't it? I looked closely at the documents Mr. Dawson had laid out on the table. They were printed in small type, with some pages marked for signature. I'd like to read them first, I said, reaching for my glasses. Of course, Mr. Dawson smiled, but I noticed him glance nervously at Abby. Telma, I've already checked everything. Abby put her hand on my shoulder. These are standard forms. Besides, Dr. Hayes is expecting us in an hour. If we're late, we'll have to reschedule for next week. I didn't remember agreeing to see Dr. Hayes today, but I had been feeling distracted and sleepy over the last few days. Maybe I just forgot. Here, and here. Mr. Dawson pointed to the signature lines, turning the pages so quickly that I could barely make out the headings. Medical powers of attorney. Authorization to access medical information. I signed automatically, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. On the last page, my gaze caught on the phrase, property management. I paused. What's this? I pointed to the paragraph. Just in case you need long-term hospitalization, Abby explained too quickly. So we can pay the bills for the house, utilities, and so on. Something told me I was making a mistake, but my head was foggy, and Abby was so insistent. After all, Randall is my son. Of course, I can trust him to manage the house while I'm sick. With a heavy heart, I signed the last document. Mr. Dawson quickly gathered the papers, stamped them with his seal, said goodbye, and left. It was only in the evening, when the effects of the strange medication had worn off a little, that I began to realize that I might have signed documents that were much more serious than just medical powers of attorney, and that the web of lies Abby had spun was becoming denser and more dangerous. Betty called the morning after the family council. I answered in a whisper, locked in the bathroom. Thelma, I spoke to your lawyer, she said, her voice sounding alarmed. The situation is serious. Abby really did get power of attorney over your property. They've already contacted a real estate company about selling your house. So soon? My heart sank. They didn't even wait. You need to act immediately. The lawyer said you have to come to his office in person so he can prepare the documents to revoke the power of attorney. I can pick you up today. I'm not sure I can leave, I admitted. After yesterday's conversation, Abby has been watching me closely. She even hides the front door key. What are they planning to do next? Abby said that on Monday they're taking me to a rehabilitation center for an evaluation before admitting me to a nursing home. I don't believe it's really an evaluation, but maybe it's my chance to get out of here. We agreed that Betty would wait for me on Monday near the clinic where I'm supposed to be taken. If Randall and Abby really leave me there, I'll be able to contact Betty, and we'll go to a lawyer. The weekend dragged on painfully slowly. Abby was unusually kind. She cooked my favorite meals, asked how I was feeling, even offered to read to me aloud. This false concern was worse than open hostility. Randall tried to spend as much time as possible away from home, citing work. Even on the weekend, he left on important business, unable to bear my accusing gaze. Only Piper remained sincere. On Saturday evening, she slipped into my room while Abby was watching TV. "Grandma," she whispered, sitting on the edge of my bed, "I don't believe you have dementia. Mom is making it all up, I know it." I hugged my granddaughter, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "Thank you, sweetie. That means a lot to me." "Are they really going to send you to a nursing home?" Her voice trembled. "I'm afraid so." I stroked her head. "But I'm not going to give up without a fight." "Can I help?" Piper straightened up, determination burning in her eyes. "The most important thing is not to believe them if they say I don't want to see you or talk to you. I'll always be happy to see you and Cody no matter what happens." Piper nodded and hugged me tightly. I felt her small shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. "I'm so ashamed of them," she whispered. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," I said, gently pulling away and wiping the tears from her cheeks. "You're not to blame for anything. And remember, no matter what happens, I love you." On Monday morning, Abby came into my room unusually excited. Her eyes were feverishly bright and her smile was wider than usual. "Telma, it's time to get ready." She opened the closet and started taking out my clothes. "Today is an important day." I slowly got out of bed, watching her fuss. Something about my sister-in-law's behavior alarmed me even more than usual. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, pulling on a sweater. "To St. Catherine's Medical Center." Abby didn't even look at me as she packed some things into a small bag. "You'll be examined by a geriatric specialist, Dr. Fellows. He's a very good doctor with extensive experience working with dementia patients." "I don't have dementia," I repeated for the umpteenth time, but Abby just waved me off. "Hurry up, please. Randall is waiting in the car." Sure enough, Randall was sitting behind the wheel of their silver sedan, tapping his fingers nervously on the steering wheel. When we left the house, he didn't even turn to look at me. "Sit in the back, Thelma," Abby said, opening the rear door. "It'll be more comfortable that way." I obeyed silently. My bag was already in the back seat, much larger than would be necessary for a simple doctor's visit. This confirmed my fears. They weren't planning to take me back home. We left the area where Randall lived and headed for the outskirts of Marysville. I didn't know this part of town very well, mostly industrial areas and new housing developments. I had never heard of St. Catherine's Medical Center before, but I decided not to ask any questions. The less they suspected that I was up to something, the better. After a 20-minute drive, we turned onto a quiet street lined with old oak trees. At the end of the street was a large brick building surrounded by a neat fence. "Pine Forest Nursing Home," read the modest sign at the gate. "This isn't St. Catherine's Medical Center," I remarked, feeling a chill run through me as I realized what was happening. A slight change of plans. Abby turned around, and a smile appeared on her face that sent a chill down my spine. We decided there was no point in delaying the inevitable. Randall stopped the car not at the main entrance, but at the side of the building where no one was visible. He remained silent, staring straight ahead. "Get out, Thelma." Abby got out of the car and opened the back door. "We're here." "I'm not going anywhere." I crossed my arms over my chest. "You're trying to trick me into going to a nursing home." I didn't give my consent. "Consent?" Abby laughed, and it was a creepy laugh, devoid of any joy. "You don't need to give your consent. You're incapacitated, remember? We have all the necessary documents." "Then why aren't we going to the main entrance? Why are we hiding here?" "Because there are too many witnesses there." Abby leaned toward me, her eyes flashing with anger. "Now get out of the car, you old hag, before I drag you out by your hair." I realized it was useless to argue. Slowly, leaning on my cane, I got out of the car. The cold October wind ruffled my gray hair and crept under my thin sweater. "Randall," I turned to my son, who was still sitting behind the wheel. "Are you really going to let her do this? Abandon your own mother like she's a useless thing? Randall finally looked up and I saw agonizing shame in his eyes, but he didn't say a word. Here are your things. Abby threw my bag onto the gravel driveway. I hope you need them. I bent down to pick up the bag, and at that moment felt a strong push in my back. Losing my balance, I fell to my knees, dropping my cane. Pain shot through my joints. Abby, Randall exclaimed, speaking for the first time. Shut up and start the car, she snapped, then turned to me. Have a nice life, you poor old hag. Good luck, you burden. She returned to the car, slamming the door loudly. Randall gave me one last look, full of shame and regret, and started the engine. A few seconds later, the silver sedan disappeared around the bend, leaving me alone on the cold ground by the fence of the nursing home. With difficulty, I got to my feet and picked up my cane, then looked around. No one had seen the scene. The side of the property was empty, only bare trees swaying their branches in the wind. Picking up my bag, I slowly moved toward the main entrance. My knees hurt, and my palms were scraped from the fall, but much more painful was the wound in my heart from my own son's betrayal. At the reception desk, I was greeted by a young woman with a name tag that read, Lisa, Administrator. How can I help you? She asked with a polite smile. My name is Thelma Brown, I tried to speak firmly, even though I was trembling inside. My son and his wife just left me here. Lisa frowned as she looked through some lists on her computer screen. I'm sorry, but we don't have any records of a new admission for today. Your name is not in the system. They didn't register me in advance? No, she shook her head. To be admitted to our facility, you need to make an appointment in advance, provide medical documents, and confirm your ability to pay. It's quite a lengthy process. I felt the ground slip away from under my feet. They hadn't even planned to admit me to this nursing home. They had simply thrown me out like a piece of trash on the outskirts of town, with no money, no documents, and no way to get home. Do you have any documents with you? Lisa asked, seeing my confusion. Health insurance, ID? I opened the bag Abby had packed for me. Inside were a few changes of underwear, 2 old nightgowns, a sweater I hadn't worn in years, a worn book, and a bag of cheap cookies. No wallet, no documents, no phone, not even my medication. No. I shook my head, feeling a lump in my throat. I don't have anything. Can you call your relatives? Lisa looked genuinely concerned. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I smiled bitterly. They did it on purpose, and I have nowhere to call. I don't have a phone. Lisa looked confused. This situation was clearly beyond standard procedures. I can offer to call social services, she finally said. They can help in situations like this. And what will they do? Send me to a homeless shelter? Perhaps they can contact your relatives, find out what happened. My relatives just threw me out on the street. I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. They took my documents, my money, my phone. They plan to sell my house while I'm missing. Lisa was silent, clearly not knowing what to say. Finally, she sighed and suggested, maybe you have friends you could turn to. Betty. Of course, Betty. She's waiting for me at St. Catherine's Medical Center. But where is that? And how am I supposed to get there without any money? Can I use your phone? I asked. I need to call a friend. Of course. Lisa handed me the landline phone. I dialed Betty's number, praying she would answer. After the 3rd ring, I heard her alarmed voice. Hello? Betty, it's me, Thelma. I struggled to hold back my tears. They tricked me. They didn't take me to the clinic. They dumped me at the Pine Forest nursing home on the outskirts of town. My God, Betty exclaimed. Are you okay? As okay as I can be in my situation. I have no documents, no money, nothing. Wait there, don't go anywhere. I'll be right there. Thank you, I whispered, feeling tears running down my cheeks. After hanging up, I turned to Lisa. My friend is coming to pick me up. Can I wait here? Of course. She nodded with relief. Sit down in the lobby. Would you like some tea? I nodded gratefully and sank into an armchair in the corner of the lobby. Only now, when the initial shock had begun to subside, did I feel the full weight of what had happened. My own son had allowed his wife to deceive me, steal my documents, and throw me out on the street like a stray dog. And all for money for my house, which they planned to sell. I looked out the window at the falling leaves and thought about how my life had turned into a nightmare in a single day. But deep down, my determination not to give up grew stronger. They didn't know who they were dealing with yet. Thelma Brown had never been a weak woman, and even at 76, I wasn't about to simply accept the role of victim. A fight was coming, for my home, for my dignity, for justice. And I was ready for that fight, no matter what. Betty arrived 40 minutes later, which felt like an eternity to me. When I saw her old green Volkswagen, I felt such relief that I could barely hold back my tears. Betty ran out of the car, despite her arthritis, and hugged me tightly. "Telma, dear," her voice trembled with indignation, "I can't believe they did this to you." "Believe me, neither can I said with a bitter smile, clutching my pathetic bag of belongings to my chest. "Thank you for coming." On the way, I told Betty everything in detail. How Abby threw me out of the car, how Randall watched silently without intervening, how I discovered I had no ID or money. "That's a crime." Betty tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, her usually kind face contorted with anger. "We have to report it to the police." "And what am I going to tell them?" I sighed. "That my son and his wife, to whom I signed a power of attorney, threw me out of the nursing home? They'll just show the document saying I'm incapacitated and say I ran away from my caring guardians." Betty frowned, but didn't argue. She knew I was right. "Then what are we going to do?" "First, I need a place to stay for the night," I said, feeling incredibly tired. The events of the day had exhausted me physically and emotionally. "It's not even up for discussion," Betty said firmly. "You're staying with me for as long as you need." "I don't want to be a burden." "Nonsense," Betty interrupted me. "When Hank died and I was left alone with 3 children, who took my boys every Sunday so I could get some rest? Who helped me with their homework when I was working 2 jobs? You did, Telma. And don't you dare talk about being a burden." I nodded silently, feeling a lump of gratitude rise in my throat. Betty's house was in an old neighborhood of Marysville, surrounded by other old houses with history. It was a small but cozy one-story cottage with a porch filled with pots of geraniums. Betty's sons had long since grown up and moved away, one to Portland, another to Chicago, and the third to Boston. They called their mother every week and sent money for the holidays, but they rarely visited. It was too far. "Make yourself comfortable in Stephen's room," Betty said, leading me into a small bedroom where posters of rock bands from the 80s still hung on the walls. "It's been empty for 20 years, but I air it out regularly and change the bedding. You never know, the boys might come back." Her voice sounded with the quiet sadness of a lonely mother whose children live their lives far away from her. I understood that feeling like no one else. After a hot shower and a hearty dinner, I felt a little better. Betty and I settled down in the living room with cups of tea, thinking about our next steps. "First, we need to find out what's going on with your house and your bills," Betty said practically. "Tomorrow, we'll go to the bank and the lawyer." "Without any documents?" I shook my head. "They won't even let me in the door." "Don't you have any copies? Passport, insurance, anything?" I thought about it. "There are copies of all the important documents in a safe deposit box at the bank." Howard was always very cautious, "But you need ID to access the box." "Maybe your lawyer can help?" Betty suggested. "He should have copies of your will, marriage certificate, and title to the house." "Maybe," I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. "But even if so, the process of contesting the power of attorney could take weeks. By that time, Abby could have already sold the house and emptied my accounts." "Then we need to act quickly," Betty said decisively, standing up. "Tomorrow morning, we'll go to your lawyer. Right now, you need to rest." Despite my exhaustion, I couldn't fall asleep in a strange bed. Thoughts of my son's betrayal, the loss of my home, and an uncertain future kept me awake. I thought about Piper and Cody. What had Randall and Abby told them? That their grandmother had moved to a nursing home and didn't want to see them? Or simply that Grandma had gone away? In the morning, Betty and I went to the office of my lawyer, Harvey Peterson, with whom Howard and I had worked for the last 20 years of our lives. Harvey already knew about the situation from Betty and greeted us with obvious concern. "Mrs. Brown," he shook my hand firmly, "I am very sorry about what has happened. What your son and daughter-in-law have done falls under several sections of the criminal code. Is that good or bad? I asked wearily. Both, Harvey said, pointing to the chairs at his desk. Good because we have legal grounds to fight. Bad because the criminal investigation could drag on for months. In the meantime, the power of attorney you signed remains in effect. But I signed it under pressure, I protested. I was deceived. I wasn't told what I was signing. I believe you, Mrs. Brown. Harvey raised his hand, reassuring me. But we'll have to prove it in court. First, we need to restore your documents and freeze your accounts to prevent further theft. Have they already taken anything? I froze, waiting for his answer. Harvey's face darkened. I'm afraid so. $50,000 was withdrawn from the account yesterday, and the house has already been put up for sale. I felt the room spin before my eyes. 50,000. That was the amount Abby had mentioned when I overheard her talking to Randall. The money Howard and I had saved throughout our lives, skimping on everything, denying ourselves small pleasures. Thelma? Betty put her hand on my shoulder anxiously. Are you okay? Yes. I took a deep breath, trying to cope with the dizziness. It's too much. We can file a request for an emergency temporary revocation of the power of attorney, Harvey continued. On the grounds that you signed the document under pressure and did not understand its contents. But for that, we'll need a medical examination confirming that you are legally competent. Is that possible? Betty asked hopefully. Possible, but not easy. Harvey tapped his finger on the table. They have Dr. Hayes' report on progressive dementia. Dr. Hayes? I couldn't believe my ears. But he never gave me that diagnosis. He said I was recovering very well from my stroke. I'm afraid they have a document with his signature. Harvey showed me a copy of the medical report. I studied the paper carefully. The signature did look like Dr. Hayes's, but something was wrong with it. It's a forgery, I said confidently. Dr. Hayes always puts a period after his signature. There isn't one here. Harvey and Betty exchanged glances. That's interesting, Harvey said, taking the document and studying it carefully. If it really is a forgery, that changes things. But we still need an official report from another doctor confirming your legal capacity. How are we supposed to get that without health insurance and documents? I have a friend who's a neurologist, Dr. Linda Chang. Harvey tapped his pen thoughtfully on the table. I think she'd be willing to examine you as a favor to me. We worked together on a medical malpractice case once. After visiting the lawyer, we went to the bank. As I expected, without documents, they refused to even listen to me. Only after Harvey intervened and called the bank manager were we able to get a meeting with an employee. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Brown. The young man in a suit looked genuinely upset. But the power of attorney issued to your son is valid. We cannot block the accounts without a court order. What about my access to the accounts? I asked, already knowing the answer. Your son has changed the terms of access. Now his signature is required for any transactions. What about the safe deposit box? The employee checked the information on the computer. Safe deposit box number 342 was opened yesterday at 2:30 p.m. The contents have been removed. I closed my eyes, feeling my last hope melt away. All my documents, the jewelry Howard gave me on our anniversaries, the letters we wrote to each other during his military service. All of it was now in Abby's hands. Let's get out of here, Betty said quietly, seeing my state. That same day, Harvey arranged for me to see Dr. Chang, who examined me in her office after her appointments were over. She was a young, energetic woman with piercing eyes and soft hands. No signs of dementia, she concluded after a thorough examination. There are some age-related changes typical for your age and the effects of the stroke, but they do not affect your cognitive abilities or your ability to make decisions. It was a small victory, but I knew there was a long battle ahead. Harvey filed a petition to have the power of attorney declared invalid and return control of the property to me. But the first hearing was not scheduled for another 2 weeks. By then, the house may already be sold, I remarked gloomily as Betty and I returned to her home. Don't despair prematurely, Betty tried to reassure me. Harvey said he would file a motion to prohibit any transactions with your property until the court's decision. I nodded, but my heart was heavy. Even if the court ruled in Harvey's favor, it wouldn't bring back the $50,000 that had been stolen from me, nor would it erase the pain of my son's betrayal. In the evening, the doorbell rang. A girl of about 14 stood on the doorstep with a backpack slung over her shoulder. I didn't recognize her at first, but Betty smiled warmly. "Hi, Chloe. Piper already called and said you'd be coming by." "Piper?" I perked up. "You know my granddaughter?" "This is Chloe, her best friend," Betty explained. "They take art classes together, which I teach at the cultural center." Chloe shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Piper asked me to give you this," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. "She can't come herself. Her parents think she's at extracurricular activities." I took the envelope with trembling hands. The handwriting was definitely Piper's, angular, with a characteristic slant to the left. "Thank you, Chloe." I tried to speak calmly, even though my heart was pounding like crazy. "How is she? And Cody?" "Not very well." Chloe lowered her eyes. "She cries all the time. She says her parents are monsters. Her father just stays silent, and her mother has forbidden her to even mention you. She said you're in a special facility well, because I'm crazy?" I smiled bitterly. Chloe nodded awkwardly. "Something like that. But Piper doesn't believe it. She says you're the most sane person she knows." "She's only 14, but she understands people better than her father," I sighed. "Thank you for coming, Chloe. It means a lot to me. Piper asked me to tell you she'll come see you as soon as she can get away. And Cody, too, although he's more afraid of his mother." When Chloe left, I opened the envelope. Inside were several sheets of paper covered in familiar handwriting. "Dear Grandma, I don't know where you are now, but I hope you're okay. Mom and Dad say you're in a special place where they'll help you with your problems, but I know that's a lie. You've always been the smartest person in our family. I found something in Dad's office. They are copies of documents that you signed. They say that you are giving them the right to dispose of your house and money. That's not true, is it? You would never do that of your own free will. Mom has already started selling your things. She says that the house will soon be sold to some important businessman. She's always on the phone talking about commissions and closing dates. I want to help you, Grandma. Tell me what I can do. I can bring you your things, your documents, if I find them. I can testify in court if necessary. I don't care what my parents say. I love you and miss you. Cody says hi too. He can't write himself. Mom checks his phone, but he's on your side. Yours, Piper." Attached to the letter were blurry photos of documents, the very power of attorney I had signed, thinking they were medical forms. It did indeed say something about the transfer of property management rights. I felt so stupid. How could I not have noticed? But now was not the time for self-reproach. I sat down to write a reply to Piper, thanking her for her support and asking her to be careful. I didn't want her to get in trouble with her parents because of me. At the end of the letter, I added, "Don't worry about me, sweetie. I won't give up without a fight. Your grandmother may be old, but she can still stand up for herself. And remember, no matter what happens, I will always love you and Cody." I sealed the envelope and gave it to Betty to pass to Chloe during the next art class. Now I had hope, not only for justice through the courts, but also for the support of my grandchildren. And that hope gave me the strength to keep fighting despite all the obstacles. The days at Betty's house dragged on slowly. I tried to be useful. I cooked meals and did simple cleaning as much as my sore knees would allow. Betty objected, saying I needed to rest. But I couldn't just sit around doing nothing. Working helped me take my mind off my son's betrayal and the uncertainty of my situation. Harvey acted quickly. He filed a motion to prohibit any transactions involving my property, arranged for an independent medical examination, and even found a detective who agreed to search for evidence of Dr. Hayes's forged signature. But all this took time, and time was against us. On the fourth day after my expulsion, Harvey called with alarming news. "I'm afraid the judge has rejected our request to freeze your assets," he said, his voice tense. He found the other side's arguments more convincing. They have medical reports confirming the diagnosis of dementia and testimony from a social worker about your inappropriate behavior. "But that's a lie," I exclaimed. "Dr. Chang confirmed that I don't have dementia." "I know, Mrs. Brown, but the judge believes that until the case is fully reviewed, there are grounds to trust your legal guardians. Randall provided the court with evidence of large expenditures from your account in recent months, which allegedly demonstrate your inability to manage your finances. What other expenditures? I was furious. I haven't bought anything big in years. According to your statement, you transferred $17,000 to a certain Victor Novak in May of this year, and another $12,000 in July. Do you know this person? I've never heard of him. This is fake, Harvey. They fabricated the statement. I believe you, Mrs. Brown, but we need proof. I've requested the original bank documents, but it will take time. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking with anger and helplessness. Fake medical reports, forged bank statements. What else would Randall and Abby do to get my money? Don't despair. Betty put her hand on my shoulder. The truth always comes out. But will I live long enough to see that happen? I smiled bitterly. On the evening of the 5th day, Betty and I sat on the porch of her house, enjoying the warm evening, which was rare for October. I was knitting a scarf for Piper, the only activity that always calmed my nerves, while Betty read aloud from a new detective novel that we had both wanted to read for a long time. Suddenly, the silence of the evening was broken by the sound of a car pulling up. An expensive black Mercedes stopped right in front of Betty's house. Are you expecting guests? I asked in surprise. No. Betty put down her book and stood up, peering into the twilight. I can't see who it is. The car door swung open and out stepped Abby. Even in the twilight, I would have recognized her gait and perfectly straight posture. My heart skipped a beat. What was she doing here? How had she found me? Betty, it's Abby! I grabbed my friend's hand in alarm. My sister-in-law! What? Betty jumped up, shielding me with her body. Don't worry, I won't let her hurt you again. Abby quickly climbed the porch steps. In the light of the lantern, I saw her face, pale with dark circles under her eyes. Her immaculate hairstyle had been replaced by a messy ponytail, and instead of her usual business suit, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Thelma, she stopped a few steps away from us. I need to talk to you. Get out of here. Betty stepped forward, her usually kind face contorted with anger. How dare you show up here after what you did? Please. Abby's voice sounded desperate, which was very unusual for her. This is very important. It's about my career, my life. Didn't you care about Thelma's life when you threw her out of the car with no money and no ID? Betty crossed her arms over her chest. Get out of here before I call the police! Thelma, please. Abby ignored Betty and addressed me directly. 5 minutes. I just want to talk. If after that you still want me to leave, I'll leave. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to kick out this woman who had caused me so much pain. But another part, the part that had spent 40 years teaching children literature and humanity, was curious. What could have made the self-assured, calculating Abby come to me with such desperation in her voice? Okay, I finally said. 5 minutes. Thelma, Betty protested. You don't have to listen to her. I know, I squeezed my friend's hand, but I want to understand why she came. We moved to the living room. Abby sat on the edge of the sofa, looking completely different from usual. Tense, nervous, her hands shaking. Speak, I said coldly. Your time is up. The deal to sell your house fell through, Abby said, as if she were announcing the end of the world. The buyer backed out at the last minute. And? I raised an eyebrow. You came here to tell me that? It's strange that you even thought it would upset me. You don't understand. Abby clenched her fists. It was the biggest deal of my career. The commission was almost $100,000, money that would have solved all our financial problems. I'm sorry your plan to steal my property didn't work out, I replied dryly. Is that all? No, Abby lowered her eyes. The thing is, the buyer, Nigel Harding, found out about you. And about us? What happened? The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd heard it before. Nigel Harding? I frowned. Who is that? Don't you remember? Abby looked at me in surprise. He was your student, 25 years ago. He says you changed his life. And then I remembered. Nigel Harding, a skinny, awkward teenager with a mop of red hair and eyes full of thirst for knowledge. One of the smartest and most talented students I had ever taught. Nigel, I smiled involuntarily. Of course I remember him. A brilliant mind, an excellent writer. He won every literary competition in the state. I helped him prepare his application for Harvard. Now he's one of the most influential businessmen in Marysville. Abby pursed her lips. Owner of Harding Industries, a chain of hotels and shopping centers, and he was going to buy your house, more precisely the entire street, for a new development project. And how did he find out about me? I asked, although I already guessed. His daughter Amelia is in the same class as Piper. Abby looked as if she was about to burst into tears. They're friends. Piper told her what happened to you, that we sent you to a nursing home. And? And Amelia told her father, and when he saw your name on the documents for the house he was planning to buy. Abby paused, searching for the right words. Anyway, he was furious. He said you were the best teacher he ever had, that you believed in him when no one else did, and that he wouldn't deal with people who treated their elderly relatives that way. I felt a rush of warmth in my heart. Nigel had always been a special child, sensitive, fair-minded. I was glad to know that he hadn't changed as he grew up and became successful. He didn't just walk away from the deal, Abby continued, her voice trembling. He threatened to tell everyone in the Marysville business community what I had done, how I had cheated my own mother-in-law, forged documents, and left an elderly woman without money or papers. She paused. If that happens, my career will be ruined. No one will trust me to sell their house. I could lose my license. And what do you want from me? I looked closely at Abby, trying to understand where she was going with this. She swallowed, clearly struggling to find the words. I want to ask you to talk to Nigel. Tell him that things aren't what they seem, that it was a misunderstanding, that you wanted to move into a nursing home yourself. I couldn't believe my ears. This woman who had deceived me, stolen my money, thrown me away like trash, was now asking me to lie to save her reputation? Are you serious? I even laughed at the absurdity of her request. Do you really think I'm going to help you after everything you've done? I'll give you your money back, Abby said hastily. All $50,000 we took from your account. And the documents too. And the keys to the house. You can go back and live there like before. What about my progressive dementia? I asked ironically. Don't I need specialized care? Abby blushed but didn't look away. We'll withdraw the application for your incapacitation. We'll say there was a mistake, that new tests have shown that your memory and cognitive functions are fine. What will Randall say? I watched her reaction closely. Does he agree with your decision? Randall will do what I say, Abby snapped. And there was so much contempt for my son in that sentence that I felt sorry for him, despite everything he had done. What if I refuse? I asked. If I don't talk to Nigel or if I tell him the truth? Abby's face contorted with fear. Then I'll lose everything, she said quietly. My job, my reputation, my clients. They'll take our house away for the debts. Randall could lose his job if all this comes out. The children will be left homeless. Don't be dramatic, I interrupted her. The children are fine. They can always live with me in my house, the one you tried to sell. Abby lowered her head in defeat. What do you want, Telma? She asked quietly. What do you want in exchange for your help? I thought about it. What did I really want? To get my house and money back, yes, of course. But most importantly, I wanted justice and security for myself in the future. For starters, full control over my property, I said firmly. Immediate revocation of the power of attorney and the declaration of my incapacity. Return of all the money you took from my accounts. Return of all my documents and valuables from the safe deposit box. Abby nodded hastily, ready for anything. Of course, all this will be done immediately. And one more thing. I raised my finger. I want a written confession of what you did. A detailed description of how you forged medical documents, tricked me into signing a power of attorney, and threw me out of the car without money or documents, with your and Randall's signatures. Why? Abby's face contorted with horror. Such a document could destroy us if it fell into the hands of the police or a lawyer. Exactly. I nodded. It will be my insurance for the future. The document will be kept by my lawyer with instructions to provide it to the authorities only if something like this happens to me again. Abby bit her lip, clearly struggling with herself. Okay, she finally said. We'll write that confession, but you must promise not to use it if we fulfill all the conditions. I promise, I nodded, provided you never try to take my house or my money away from me again. What about Nigel Harding? Abby asked hopefully. Will you talk to him? I smiled, feeling for the first time in days that I was in control of the situation. I'll meet with him, but I won't lie for you, Abby. I'll tell him the truth, the whole truth. And what he decides to do with that information is up to him. Abby's face turned pale. But it will ruin my career. Maybe, I shrugged. Or maybe not. It will depend on how sincere your repentance is and how quickly you return everything you took from me. Nigel has always been a fair guy. I think he'll give you a chance to make amends if he sees that you truly regret what you've done. I agree. Abby seemed ready to accept any terms. When can you meet with him? Tomorrow, I said firmly. Tomorrow at noon. You will arrange the meeting and bring me all my documents, the keys to the house, and a written confession. Then I'll talk to Nigel. Thank you, Abby exhaled. You won't regret it, Telma. I already regret a lot of things, I replied quietly. That I didn't see through your true intentions sooner. That my son chose money over his own mother. But most of all, I regret that Piper and Cody had to see how heartless their parents can be. Abby lowered her head, clearly unable to find the words to respond. When she left, Betty hugged me. Are you sure she'll keep her word? My friend asked doubtfully. That she won't try to deceive you again? No, I shook my head. I don't trust her one bit. But right now she's desperate, and desperation makes people predictable. Besides, I smiled, I have an ace up my sleeve. Nigel Harding, one of the most influential people in town, who still seems to have warm feelings for his old teacher. Betty smiled, squeezing my hand. Who would have thought that your past would come to your aid in such an unexpected way? Indeed, I said thoughtfully, looking out the window at Abby's Mercedes, which had already disappeared into the darkness. You never know what seed you planted many years ago will grow into a tree that will one day give you shelter and protection. The next morning, I woke up with the first rays of the sun, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and hope. The upcoming meeting with Nigel Harding could change everything, or change nothing. I wasn't sure Abby would keep her word and actually give me back control of my property, but for the first time in all these days, I had a chance. Betty made a special breakfast, blueberry pancakes, my favorite. She was fussing more than usual, clearly just as nervous as I was. Are you sure you don't want me to go with you? She asked for the third time as she poured coffee. I could wait in the car. It'll be fine, I said, patting her hand reassuringly. Abby wouldn't dare hurt me with Nigel here. Besides, the meeting will be in a cafe, a public place. At 11 o'clock, a car horn sounded outside the window. I looked out and saw the same black car that Abby had arrived in yesterday parked outside Betty's house. This time, a young man in a formal suit was sitting behind the wheel, clearly not Randall. It's for me, I said, throwing on my coat, the only warm thing I had with me. The rest of my clothes were at Randall's house or at my own house. Call me as soon as you're done. Betty handed me her old cell phone. I'll be waiting. The driver was quiet and reserved. He greeted me politely, helped me into the car, and didn't say a word the whole way except, please hold on tight, there's a turn coming up. We pulled up to Maple Terrace, one of the most expensive restaurants in Marysville. I had never been here before. On a teacher's salary, places like this were out of reach, even for special occasions. Abby met me at the entrance. She looked completely different from yesterday. Her hair was perfect again. She was wearing an elegant suit, and her makeup hid the traces of a sleepless night. He's waiting inside, she said quietly. Remember our agreement? I remember everything, I replied coldly. Did you bring what you promised? Abby handed me a bulky envelope. Here are all your documents, house keys, bank card, and signed confession. Randall signed it too. I opened the envelope and quickly glanced through the contents. My passport, insurance, card, set of keys, and a sheet of paper covered in Abby's small handwriting, with 2 signatures at the bottom. Has the power of attorney been revoked too? I asked, putting the envelope in my bag. Yes, Abby nodded. My lawyer filed all the necessary paperwork this morning, and the declaration of your incapacity has also been revoked. Okay, I nodded. Let's go then. Nigel Harding was sitting at a table in the far corner of the restaurant. Even after 25 years, I would have recognized him anywhere. The same reddish hair, though graying at the temples, the same attentive eyes behind his glasses. Of course, he had changed. His shoulders had broadened, his face had taken on the features of a confident man. But something in the expression of his eyes, in his slight smile, remained the same, boyish, open. He stood up when he saw us, and I was surprised to notice how tall he had become. Or had I become shorter with age? Mrs. Brown. He stepped toward me, and there was so much warmth in his eyes that I smiled involuntarily. You haven't changed at all. Liar, I laughed, letting him hug me. I've aged a quarter of a century since we last met. To me, you'll always be the teacher who made me believe I could be anything. He pulled out a chair, helping me sit down. Abby remained standing, clearly not knowing what to do. You can go, Mrs. Brown. Nigel didn't even look in her direction. We'll call you when we're done. But Abby hesitated, giving me a pleading look. It'll be fine, I nodded to her. Go on. When Abby left, Nigel called the waiter and ordered tea and cakes. You always like ginger tea with lemon, if I remember correctly, he said with a smile. You remember that after all these years? I was touched. I remember everything, he replied simply. How you brought us tea in a thermos while we were preparing for literary competitions. You always added lemon and said it helped you think. We talked about the past for a while, his school years, the literary competitions he won, his admission to Harvard. He told me about his career in business, how he started a small company that eventually grew into a large corporation. You know, I've often thought about you, Nigel said when the tea was served, about how you changed my life. If it weren't for you, I would never have gotten into Harvard. I would never have believed that a boy from a poor family could achieve anything. You achieved everything yourself, I objected, with your mind and hard work. Perhaps, he smiled. But you were the first person who saw my potential. That's worth a lot. Finally, the conversation turned to the current situation. My daughter told me what happened, Nigel frowned, but I'd like to hear it from you. I told him everything. How, after my stroke, Randall and Abby had persuaded me to live with them temporarily. How I had overheard them talking about selling my house. How Abby had slipped me some pills that made me drowsy and disoriented. How she had forced me to sign a power of attorney and then threw me out on the street with no money and no documents. My God, Nigel shook his head when I finished my story. How could anyone do that to a loved one? And all for money? Not just for money, I sighed. Abby always considered me a nuisance. She never accepted me as part of the family. And Randall, he was always a weak person. Even as a child, he could never stand up to pressure. And now they want you to convince me to buy your house after all? Nigel smiled. To save your sister-in-law's career? Exactly, I nodded. But I'm not going to lie for her. And I'm not asking you to buy my house, Nigel. In fact, I don't want to sell it. It's the last thing I have left from my life with Howard. I understand, he said thoughtfully, stirring his tea. But let me make you an offer. Not for your sister-in-law, for you. He laid out his plan. Harding Industries is still interested in buying property on my street for a new project. But instead of just buying my house, they're offering an exchange. My old house for a new modern apartment in one of their best residential complexes, with fully paid maintenance for life, plus significant monetary compensation. It will be a fair deal, Nigel emphasized. No middlemen, no commissions for your daughter-in-law. Everything will be done directly through my lawyers. I thought about it. The idea of leaving the house where I had spent most of my life with Howard was painful. But at the same time, the house was too big for a single elderly woman. The stairs were becoming increasingly difficult for my bad knees. The garden required constant maintenance. And a new apartment with no maintenance worries and modern amenities for seniors sounded very appealing. I'll think about your offer, I finally said. But what about Abby? She's counting on me to help her save her reputation. Nigel frowned. I won't have anything to do with her, he said firmly. What she did is unforgivable. If my daughter hadn't told me about this situation, he shook his head, I would have unwittingly become an accomplice to the deception. Will she lose her license? Probably, he shrugged. If you decide to file a complaint with the real estate licensing board, that's your right. I thought about it. Did I want to completely destroy Abby's career? It might be fair retribution for what she tried to do to me. But what would happen to Piper and Cody? They didn't deserve to suffer because of their parents' actions. I don't want to file a complaint, I finally decided. At least not yet. I have their written confession. That's enough to keep them in check. All I want is to regain control of my life and never again be dependent on their mercy. I can help with that. Nigel smiled. My lawyers can set up a trust fund for your grandchildren. That way, your son and his wife will never gain control of your money even after your... He faltered. After my death, I finished calmly for him. We can talk about this openly, Nigel. At my age, death is not something to be afraid to mention. He looked embarrassed, and I suddenly saw in him the boy I had known a quarter of a century ago. Insecure but incredibly talented. Well, I said, setting my cup down firmly. I accept your offer, Mr. Harding. Both the exchange and the trust fund for my grandchildren. After lunch, Nigel called his car to take me home. My home, not Betty's. Before we parted, he shook my hand. I'm very glad our paths have crossed again, Mrs. Brown, even under these circumstances. Me too, Nigel, I smiled. And please, call me Thelma. You haven't been my student for a long time. A surprise awaited me at home. Piper and Cody were sitting on the porch. When she saw me, my granddaughter jumped up and threw her arms around my neck. Grandma! She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her trembling. They said you were in a nursing home, that you had dementia and didn't recognize anyone. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. I hugged her back, then reached out to Cody, who was standing a little way off, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Hi, Grandma. He hugged me awkwardly. I knew they were lying. You're too cool to give up so easily. We entered the house, and I was surprised to find that everything inside was untouched, as if I had never left. Only on the kitchen table was a large vase of flowers and a note from Randall. Mom, I know what we did is unforgivable. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Deeply sorry, Randall. I silently crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash can. Maybe someday I'll find the strength to forgive my son. But not now. The wound was too fresh. The next few weeks flew by in a flurry of activity. Nigel's lawyers were drawing up the paperwork for the house swap. My lawyer Harvey was working on a trust fund for the grandchildren, and I was sorting through my belongings for the move. Randall tried to contact me several times. He called, came by, left notes. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to see him or talk to him. Abby didn't show up at all. As I learned from Piper, an investigation had been launched against her by the licensing commission after someone filed an anonymous complaint. I suspected it might have been Nigel, but I didn't ask. In early December, I moved into a new apartment, bright, spacious, with a view of the city park and special amenities for the elderly. No stairs, wide doorways for walkers or wheelchairs, although I hoped I wouldn't need them for many years to come, and an alarm button in every room. Piper and Cody came every weekend, sometimes staying overnight. They said that things had become very difficult at home. Randall was drinking, and Abby was on the verge of a nervous breakdown due to the investigation and loss of clients. I listened to all this with sympathy for my grandchildren, but without much regret for their parents' fate. They had chosen their own path. In mid-December, when I had already settled into my new place, the doorbell rang. Abby was standing on the doorstep, gaunt, with dull eyes, dressed in simple clothes without her usual glamour. Thelma, she stammered, as if not knowing how to continue. I came to apologize, to truly apologize. Come in. I stepped aside, letting her into the apartment. Would you like some tea? She blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting such a calm reception, but nodded and came inside. You have a very nice apartment, she said uncertainly, looking around. Yes, Nigel did a good job. I shrugged, pouring tea. Why did you come, Abby? To really apologize or to ask for something again? She lowered her head. I lost my license, she said quietly, temporarily for a year, and my reputation too. No one wants to do business with me. I'm sorry, I said, setting the cup in front of her. And it wasn't a lie. I really was sorry. Not for Abby, but for Piper and Cody, who had to live in a house with parents in crisis. Really? She looked at me suspiciously. After everything I've done? I don't wish you any harm, Abby. I sat down across from her. I just want you to leave me alone. I want you and Randall to never try to control my life or my money again. I understand, she nodded. And I swear I'll never again. She fell silent, swallowing her tears. I was a monster, Thelma. I let greed and ambition cloud everything else. I risked my children's future for money. I looked at her silently, not knowing whether to believe the sincerity of her remorse. Was it real or just another manipulation? What do you want from me, Abby? I asked bluntly. Forgiveness? I can't give you that. Not yet. I understand, she said, wiping away her tears. I just wanted to say I'm sorry and that I'll never hurt you again. Never. After she left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the snow fall. I thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought me here. My son's betrayal, the unexpected help of a former student, the bitter but still victory over those who had tried to destroy me. Before Christmas, Betty, Piper, and Cody came to visit me. We decorated the Christmas tree together, baked gingerbread cookies using my grandmother's recipe, and watched old movies. Randall called to wish me a Merry Christmas, but I didn't answer the phone. Piper told him I was asleep. It was a little white lie to save me. I just wasn't ready to talk to him, even on Christmas. In the evening, after Betty had left and the grandchildren had fallen asleep in the guest bedroom, I sat by the window watching the snow fall and thinking about Howard. What would he have done in my place? Would he have forgiven his son? Probably, yes. He was always kinder and more generous than I was. But I couldn't. Not yet. And yet, looking at my sleeping grandchildren, I felt a strange calm. Yes, I had lost trust in my son. Yes, I had been forced to leave the house where I had lived most of my life. But I had gained a new independence, a new strength that I never knew I had. I was no longer a defenseless old woman who could be deceived and thrown out onto the street. I was Thelma Brown, a woman who managed to stand up for herself even at the age of 76. It was a bitter victory, but still it was a victory.